if you think the Colorado Buffaloes are going to beat the USC Trojans this weekend, everyone around Ellen's land is a Buff fan now. They're probably
We'll
going
root
to
them on in Oklahoma too. We don't want USC to win.
Yeah. Go Buffs. All right, y'all. Let's do this. We're rocking and rolling. Okay, week 7. Team, we've made it. Utes all the way, baby. All right, Kayla, I hear you. Week 7, we're talking psychosocial considerations. Mainly tonight, what we're going to be hitting on is significance over sexiness. So we used this image in the lecture. I want to spend some time thinking about this because we, talk so much about trying to get people stronger, to improve their endurance, to improve their balance, performing our assessments. We focus a lot on these physical components, right? These physical attributes that we're trying to improve upon, right? Like how fit will you let me get you has been the majority of the course. Yet when we are working with real life people that are in their somewhat complicated situations, they find themselves in all kinds of scenarios where the fitness side may not necessarily be the most important thing, or that physical health, like we spend so much time talking about. And we broke down these psychosocial considerations and how we want to kind of frame these through emotional health, through social health, through mental health, and then spiritual health. In these 4 different buckets, if we have ample resources in these areas, we have ample kind of health, quote unquote, health in these areas, this really is like a protective shield or an umbrella against the rain. When things are going well in those areas, the rain being the stressors of life, when the storms come, when we may lose a loved one, when we have some type of issue, social issue, emotional crisis, whatever it may be, that we can weather that storm a little bit when we have these ample resources. Yet that's not always the case with our patients, right? We see a lack of resources in usually at least one, and a lot of times all of these areas. And it really creates a difficult scenario. And I think if we're going to be honest with ourselves and check our biases, in many settings that are represented on this call, that getting them stronger is probably not the biggest issue. It's probably not the biggest thing that we can do to influence these people's quality of lives. Type in the chat box if that's been the case for you this week with some of your patients or clients. I think about the home health clinicians. I mean, over and over again, they walk into a home where, yes, they're there to treat someone from maybe, let's say they had a recent fall, and then they open up the door to their life and what this person is facing, to where that fall prevention program may not be as big of an issue as trying to handle some of the social dynamics that they may find themselves in. So we see these holes all the time, and sometimes they will take a bigger priority than the physical component. Now, each setting is going to be a little different, right? Because home health, you come into someone's world, their life, and a lot of these things are right in front of you. It's very visible when people are struggling in some of these buckets. Yet when someone walks onto your turf, outpatient clinicians, people put on their best faces, right? Their whole week often revolves around the visits when they see you, and they're putting on kind of their best selves, and they're usually hiding a lot of these things that are impacting them tremendously. So I think for some of us on this call, we got to dig a little bit deeper than others, right? Home healthers, you don't have to do much, but maybe outpatient folks, we have to spend a little bit more time thinking about these things because they do impact your outcomes. They impact your health outcomes that we all care about. So I want you to think about these scenarios where, let's say this person was on your caseload because of a fall or an injury. It was kind of physically related why you were supposed to be there. Yet you did kind of a non-exercise intervention, a non-PT or non-OT or non-fitness intervention with this individual, yet you impacted their life tremendously. Think about those situations. Many of you all have some really interesting stories. I want you to share that, whether in the chat or whether you raise your hand and unmute. And there's one that always comes to my mind when I think about this question, kind of the best non-exercise related question. I had a patient in Columbus, Ohio, home health context of home health, and this person was doing really well physically. They were making a lot of progress. They were improving from the balance standpoint. They were getting a lot stronger. And they were at that point of being discharged, of not having that homebound status. But the only thing that was really stopping them was a busted up concrete pad that took them from the back of their house to their garage where they could drive. They couldn't park on the front. So they had to go through the back, and they were scared to death to walk through this busted up concrete pad or to go off the pad onto the grass. They were scared to death. And the local area agency on aging had a grant that gave them funds to be able to fix that. And then once that was fixed, boom, that person was off to the races. They were a community dwelling, independent older adult, no longer homebound, just from that intervention alone. Non-exercise, but that impacted them tremendously. All right, what we got here? So Ellen said, I spent an hour a day helping my patient find a flooring company to swap out her carpet for hardwood. I love it. Ellen, do you want to expand on that a little bit? Carpet was causing a lot of falls.
I have a patient with progressive neurological complications from Parkinson's disease. And he uses one of those super cool heavy walkers that you have to depress the brakes to be able to walk. And that little guy with those little small caster wheels was getting caught up on the carpet pretty regularly. There's also a cord that's necessary. It's running along the floor. It's tripped him up, and he's had a few falls. And truthfully, the most meaningful thing that I could have done for him during that treatment session wasn't talk about a deadlift, wasn't talking about kettlebell swings. It was talking about how do I make his DME work for his home. And that meant getting new hardwood. And so I contacted a real estate agent that I know in the area, and he's really been helpful to me. He's a great guy, helped my patients if they've had to move. And he knew a good hardwood guy who could come out and give him a quote to help swap it out.
That's awesome. Now, sorry, Ellen, how did that come up in conversation? Because you're seeing this person in the outpatient setting. Like, how did you get that perspective of his home environment?
Well, I know he loves his U-Step walker. Thank you very much. The name was escaping me too, Mystery iPad. So they're using this cool U-Step walker. He loves that thing. And I tried having him do a typical rollator outside once, and it was just a plop. It just didn't go great. And so today he and his wife came in and said, hey, can we talk about using a different type of walker? Because ours isn't working. And I was like, whoa. We got to go back to the drawing board. And that's how it came up that this little walker wasn't gliding very well over his higher pile carpet that they had. Turns out the carpet is gross. It needs to be replaced anyways. They don't have people over because they're embarrassed about how gross the carpet is. And that's what they needed. Awesome. And so working the real estate agent too is the real estate agent that I talked with is a pastor. And he actually comes with people and will help move some of this stuff. He's done this in the past to kind of get his church group together and move furniture for some of my older patients. So He's a good guy to have in my book.
That's awesome. And I mean, it's a great example. I always like to think about interventions, like what's our ROI, what's our return on investment, bang for your buck, whatever phrase. And, that conversation about gait, about assistive device, like, you could go down the rabbit hole and doing all kinds of the gait training and obstacle training and, maneuvering with that AD. Think of how much ROI you would get on that versus that call that's going to utterly change how that person navigates that environment. Like the ROI on that phone call to the real estate agent to get going with this floor change is going to have an exponentially higher return on investment than if Ellen was to do a bunch of exercises that day. This is how we want to think about this. There's some other examples in here. Thanks for sharing that, Ellen. Amy Harper says, passively arranged a terminally ill patient while I talked to his family member through how to make sense of the healthcare system, docs not talking to each other, etc. My gosh, right? Who else has been in that situation, right? People have been through that medical system. They've had the countless visits, so many multi-syllable words thrown at them, very little context for a lot of these diagnoses or prognoses. And then we're there to oftentimes try and clear up that confusion, a lot of that fear, and that is time well spent. That served that patient and everyone that was in that room and that support system. Awesome, Amy. Good work. Don said, helping my geriatric patient learn how to make a cell phone call to order a compression garment, right? Like very simple, maybe not billable, right? But that is going to have a huge ROI for that person in terms of their quality of life. So we want to be thinking about this. What's our biggest bang for our buck? And oftentimes in this population, it is not the sexy deadlift. It's something that's going to be significant, and it may not be exercise related. All right, one thing in particular, in terms of psychosocial considerations, we want to kind of zoom in a little bit on social health, in particular, social isolation. We shared some really eye-opening stats in the lecture. The big dog that is kind of eye-opening is 25%. There's a 25% increased risk of mortality from all causes, if someone reports that they are socially isolated. The scarier part about this stat that was quoted for this lecture is that was a pre-COVID stat. That was a pre-COVID stat. That is reported social isolation before COVID, 25% increased risk of all-cause mortality. This is a big, big issue. COVID-19 pandemic has made this even more front and center for this population. And this is something that we need to have on our radar as clinicians and working with these folks. Now, as the research has continued to unfold on kind of the detriment of social isolation, starting to see that term starting to be teased out a little bit. So you're going to see research now that's talking about social isolation, which is having few social contacts and relationships. So this is a matter of quantity, right? That you are not interacting with a lot of individuals, or you don't have a lot of relationships by number. Then on the other side, we have loneliness, which is that sense or that feeling of being alone. And it's often, but not always, associated with fewer than desired social relationships. So it's the feeling of being alone. This is very important to understand, right? And I think some of us may have felt this. I always think about the beginning of the pandemic. Very interesting time of our lives, right? Think about March, April 2020, where we had no clue what was going on, a lot of unrest in our profession. Some of you all may have lost your work, or they said, hey, don't come into work, you're not allowed, or you were forced to work because you're in a particular acute setting. But many folks were kind of forced to be at home for a period of time. There were certain folks that hated this, right? Their number of their relationships went down, but then also just that sense of being connected went down tremendously, and it impacted them in a negative manner. And then there were other folks, and type in the chat box if you're this person, they thought, oh man, I get to stay in my home for 2 weeks and not have to interact with people. This is awesome, right? This is great. I love it. This is a dream come true. I don't generally like people. This is great. So those people technically were socially isolated, right? They didn't have a lot of social contacts or relationships in that period of time, but some folks may not feel lonely, all right? Then there's the other side of the equation where you may have a lot of interactions, a lot of relationships, but you may have that sense of loneliness. And what the research is showing is that the sense of loneliness is a bigger predictor of that all-cause mortality than the actual social isolation, than the quantity. It's more about the quality than the quantity. And I think we can see this often if you've ever spent any time in like in assisted living facility, for example, where you have folks that there's tons of folks that are in that facility. They all typically will go into kind of a centralized cafeteria area to eat. They have, the regular seats, they sit with the same people, they go to their, maybe an exercise class or crafting or whatever. They interact with all kinds of people all day. They're not necessarily socially isolated, but many of them feel lonely. They have that sense of being alone. Those people are at risk of negative health outcomes because of that factor and all that comes with it. So we need to be aware of this. One can be socially isolated, but not lonely. And one can be lonely, but not socially isolated. The big thing about this is we need to hone in on the loneliness piece. Do they have that sense of feeling lonely? So we can screen for this. The UCLA loneliness scale is the most common scale that you're going to see related to kind of diving a little bit deeper into social isolation. And you're basically asking folks 3 questions. How often do you feel that you lack companionship? How often do you feel left out? And how often do you feel isolated from others? All right. And you have a 1 to 3 score. 1 is hardly ever, 3 is often. And you'll have a score range of 3 to 9. 3 to 5 is not lonely, and then 6 to 9 is considered to be lonely. So introverts don't have a shorter lifespan. I don't have to worry. You're right. You're good. You don't have to worry about them. They're fine, Ellen. They're fine. So this can help kind of quantify loneliness, that reported sense of loneliness, and we can take that into consideration and think about what can we do in this situation to kind of improve on this variable that we know is a huge factor for health outcomes. How can we make people less lonely? And this is where we like to think about building these social connections on not necessarily quantity, but quality. How can we build higher quality connections with individuals versus just a whole bunch of them? Now, this is where you have to have lots of ideas. We need lots of resources. We want to think about patching these holes up. And so if we're going to patch up these holes, particularly with social isolation, we want to be able to screen for them, use that UCLA loneliness scale, but then you really want to think about building your network. And this requires a lot of effort. If you want to do it quickly, it takes less effort, but a longer period of time to build the network. But if you put a lot of effort in, you can build a solid network that's going to serve your patients, but then probably your business as well, in a very short period of time if you make very focused efforts on building these networks. So we want to make connections with communities and other providers. We want to create a team of like-minded clinicians. And the way we like to think about this is we have a team with different roles, and we're trying to kind of fill providers with those particular roles. Like here in Lexington, I want to know, like, who's the flooring guy when I have someone that's having some flooring issues, when they may have a busted up step, for example, right? Who is the optometrist that I know can work with someone that I'm serving that can help with their vision, for example. I need to know who is at the local area agency on aging or a local senior center that can connect me with all kinds of resources and different community resources for the people that I'm serving. We want to kind of fill the gaps in those particular roles, and so we create an all-encompassing team. That can require a lot of work, going to meet people, networking, but this is where the social media side is absolutely huge. I'm asked Julie to share some of her efforts here in a second of what she's done around Charlotte. But this is where you can tap into your networks to build that team. And Julie, would you mind just kind of unmuting and sharing what you did, particularly in the MOA community, where you were fielding and asking for local Charlotte providers to build that network, and kind of the result of that?
Yeah. So like Dustin said, social media is a great, easy way to put out some feelers. So I made a Facebook post and was just asking particularly for providers that were fitness forward in their philosophy, who treat older adults. And I think we forget about Facebook a lot. Like, we think it's a dead platform, but I actually was able to get a ton of responses of different people in my networks who I hadn't talked to for a long time, but they were able to throw out some suggestions for me. And our MMOA community is, you guys, if you don't belong in there, you definitely need to get in there, because that is one of the best places to ask for certain providers in your area. Because I guarantee you there are going to be clinicians who live in your city and are going to be able to find one of those fitness forward providers easily, so you can start to help your patients filter and find the right person for them. So definitely utilize social media.
Yeah. Social media is huge. Another thing you want to think about that can be a really big bang for your buck is if you do have like a senior expo in your area. So we just had ours last weekend here in Lexington, Kentucky, and it was at our senior center, which our senior center, I don't want to brag too much, but it is epic. Like this place has so many, it's a really amazing space, but then they provide so many resources for folks. It's not very common in terms of the funding that they've gotten comparatively. Like it's just crazy. I haven't seen anything like it. But they had this expo, and everyone at that expo is looking to serve, this demographic. And, we went as Stronger Life to meet potential gym members, but we ended up networking a ton and just met a lot of folks that we're all on the same team trying to serve these folks. And now we have a bigger team in different roles on that team after making some of those connections. So if you have something like that, I highly encourage you to hit that up. That will be a good use of your time to build that team in a very short period of time. So build that network, screen first, and then build that network, because it often will require a referral or connecting to some type of community resource. Awesome. All right, resource dealer, matchmaker. That's what we're going after here. All right, Rob, there we go. Boom. All right. Since Nick Webster is also listening, 10 burpees for everybody except Rob. You've got 0. I've got 5. Come on, Nick. All right. Chest to deck, Nick. All the way, buddy. Is audio okay now, Jeff? Sweet. Okay. Good work, team. All right, we're going to shift gears, go away from psychosocial considerations, and we're going to talk about the F word. Not frailty, but the floor. So, who here has asked this question to your patient? When was the last time you got on the floor? And to add to that, not associated with a fall. If you've asked that question, I just type some of the responses that you've heard in the chat box for me. This is one of my favorite questions to ask people. Yeah, just a laugh. I don't know. I can't remember the diversion laugh. You'll hear, yeah, I just don't do it, right? Chrissy, I don't get on the floor. You'll hear years. You'll hear decades. You'll hear, I do not remember when the last time was. Oh, yeah, DJ, for sure. If they've had a total knee replacement, very likely that they have been avoiding the floor like the plague. And this is a big issue. I think it's interesting to have these conversations, but I think we need to really understand and kind of put ourselves in their shoes of what that can mean for individuals. Just think about you in your current situation right now. Like you can get to and from the ground without any issues whatsoever. Many of you all just did a bunch of burpees, right? You didn't even think about it. Let's say something happens and you don't get on the ground, and let's say you end up stretching that out over a year. So a year from now, you haven't been on the ground. You're probably still thinking to yourself, I could do this, right? Like you are still very familiar with the previous year individual, and you know, all right, I probably had the capability to get to and from the ground without assistance. Then we take that 1 year and then we stretch it out to 5, right? You still think you could probably do it, but you're starting to doubt yourself a little bit. I wonder if I can still do that. You may think you can, but you're starting to question yourselves. And then we take that 5 years and stretch it out to 10. That's when you start to talk about your old self, right? Oh yeah, old Dustin used to be able to do that. That person is long gone, right? I'm a completely different person now. Then 15 years, 20 years comes and the floor becomes lava, right? Scared to death of that surface. And that distance, that time gap allows so much fear and doubt to creep in. And you all know, especially after the past 7 weeks, that when we give that space to let fear creep in, performance often goes down in so many facets of physical performance. We need to be very aware of this when we're going to approach this intervention. It is hands down one of the scariest things we can do with our patients, but then also one of the biggest opportunities as well. But we need to acknowledge where folks are coming from. So we're going to talk about troubleshooting this, because you're going to go to use this with a wide variety of folks, and you're going to get a lot of variability in your approach of how you're going to achieve the goal of getting to and from the ground. So we're going to go through some of these assignment submissions, which y'all did awesome with, by the way. We're going to give you some examples of some different things that you will definitely want to think about when you are going to do a floor transfer with someone. First one that we want to think about is one of the most difficult transitions for folks once they get to the ground or they get on their back, and that is supine to sit. Supine to sit. Here's an example of a submission. You can tell this person does a lot of Turkish get-ups, but they basically are on their back and then coming up. We'll play that again. What is this using a lot of? This particular strategy, type in the chat box for me. What muscle group is he using a ton of to do this supine to sit? Yeah, a lot of core, right? Is this going to be easy for many of the folks that we work with? Nope, right? It's going to be very, very challenging. So what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and do this twice, all right? I want you to lay on your back and then try and come up to sitting twice. Then after that, I want you to roll over to your right side and then push yourself up to sitting. And I want you to pay attention to what your core is doing, all right? So back, there's supine to sit twice, and then supine to side lying up to sit twice. And focusing on the amount of core activation you are experiencing. So straight supine to sit, very, very challenging. Whenever we go to that side lying and then coming up, that makes it so much easier for folks, all right? So that right there is a super important strategy. Here's what that can look like. Coming over to sideline, using those hands, and then coming up to sit. Then you can do all kinds of things once you're in that position. All right, so sideline to sit. That's a very common situation that you can give them a maneuver to be able to overcome that. Another one that we talked a lot about, right, in the lab was that prone to quad, right, where instead of basically doing a push-up, we want to think about using our forearms to get our mass over our legs, to use those bigger muscles. Same kind of concept here. We want to work smarter, not harder with these individuals. All right, another thing that we need to think about is the use of that head to hips relationship, especially when we're trying to get our butt or our hips to go in a certain direction. Then we often find ourselves when we need to get our hips up, you want to think about getting your head down and being very intentional about that. And oftentimes that is going to require cueing, whether an auditory cue, sometimes it's a tactile cue as well. But we're trying to get that, typically we're trying to get the head to go down and the hips are going to come up. That is absolutely vital, especially for individuals where we're trying to get them up into a higher surface like a couch, like this, for example. Head to hips is absolutely huge. Another example, a big principle that we want to think about is using a surface as much as we can to our advantage. Lovely graphics on the wall here. By the way, where are my vestibular therapists at? Love it. So let's break this down here. So she comes up. She gets as much of her upper body as she can on that table. So that table, look at how much of her mass that table is supporting. And then all the mass that's not on that table, right? That's all that she has to work to support, right? So it basically makes it a little bit easier to handle your weight when we can rely on a surface. That's why the deep surfaces, if you are going to get someone up in a surface, so you find that deep surface, it's going to be much more helpful than kind of a shallow chair or couch, if you will. All right. Ottomans are great. Like I love ottomans because you can just get all of your mass up there and it's going to be a whole lot easier to get up on that surface. So the concept of beaching yourself, do the shamu, that is going to help. All right, next principle, elevating the ground. Who in here watched the MacGyver video? Yes. All right, it was kind of an optional video that we linked on the page. If you didn't watch that, if that's kind of news to you, yeah, y'all need to make sure you watch that. So it was, an occupational therapist basically went around the home and showed how to hack a floor transfer using all kinds of different things. But one of the coolest things was kind of that book stacking technique, or the concept of building the ground up. That is going to reduce the range of motion that our center of mass has to travel, and it's going to make it a lot easier on folks. And this is a great student submission of building the ground up using these aerobic steps that many of us will have in something like a clinic. And she'll just make kind of a little step here and gradually increase the height of her center of mass, and it makes it a whole lot easier to go over. This is one of the most helpful things that we can share with our patients, but then also their caregivers as well. When we use the floor transfer training, sometimes you're working on the skill of it, you're doing reps and reps and reps with the patient. A lot of times it's more about the caregiver, right? It's like educating the caregiver, like, all right, if Bill goes down, Betty, here's how you can help him get up. I know you're really worried that you're not able to handle him and get him up off the ground, but here's how we can set him up for success. And showing how we can elevate the ground. Maybe you may not have aerobic steppers, but you got books, you got pillows, you got cushions from the couch. There's all kinds of things that we can gradually build a step-by-step fashion to get that person up in that surface. Here's another example, the lovely book stacking trick. If you didn't get to kind of practice that, I encourage you to actually do this. It's one thing to watch the video of that OT doing it that we shared, the MacGyver floor transfer. But I really want you to try this because it is wild how easy it makes this transfer. When you just go back and forth, just reducing the range of motion that center mass has to travel. This is brilliant. Boom. Yeah, the phys rehab book. I love it. I love it. So let's go back to this. So she was in that seated position and she gets up into the chair. So what's she basically doing right there? What exercise is that? Jeff Musgrave does lots of these tricep dips, right? Really great calisthenic body weight exercise. What does that require a ton of? What do you need to even be able to get in that position, right? The shoulder mobility is absolutely huge. And a lot of people kind of go for this method. And even if they don't have that mobility, what they end up doing is they try and get that position and they can only extend their shoulders so far. What do they end up doing? They end up trying to lean forward and they get kind of in an interesting position, right? And we can make this a lot more manageable for them by elevating their center of mass, right? But with this couch in particular, what else could we do to make that particular move, kind of that tricep dip, a little bit easier? Other than elevating the ground, what else could we do to make that easier for this person? Exactly. Remove the cushion. So you just lower that surface, ultimately lowering that range of motion. They don't have to get in that in-range shoulder extension. that is going to be helpful. And oftentimes with that couch as well, you're going to be on the frame and it's going to be a much more kind of stable place to press from as opposed to a soft cushion as well. So typically a lot more comfortable for folks, especially if kind of wrist extension is a concern. So we can elevate the ground or we can lower the surface by removing a cushion, so on and so forth. Awesome, Sydney. Awesome. Here's another great example of elevating the ground. Imitating a patient with an incomplete SCI at T11. Guys got a nice little step stool here. We use that pillow. Boom. Get the other cheek. Love it. Obviously, that bench is not ideal, right? It's going to be a little mobile, but they'll get the job done. A lot of shoulder extension here. Boom. Now, I want you to notice the positioning that she went through, right? Of getting the feet in the right position to be able to help out some, whatever, they're able to give. And so this floor transfer, it's not one movement, right? It's really like 16 movements. That's what you want to think about it. Several steps, that we're having to put a pillowcase here, move the foot here, move the arm over here. And so it can be very helpful to break this down for folks and also practice it yourself. So you got a good game plan going into it. Here is another really good example of something that we need to consider, and that is upper extremity weight bearing, right? Big issue for a lot of folks of putting that hand into the ground. Particularly soft surfaces can be tough as well if they get kind of that wrist hyperextension. But this is a really great example of finding a surface, a broad or long surface, to where instead of just putting the hand down, that we had enough room to put the whole forearm down. So windowsill right there, and then was able to have a handhold for the left. And boom. So that may be something we want to think about. If weight bearing through the wrist is tough, then maybe think about weight bearing through the forearm, because that may be tolerable for some to be able to get that upper extremity assistance. All right, so those are some things to troubleshoot the floor transfer. Some of these principles of working smarter, not harder, right? Side lying to come up to sit versus that supine to sit. Quad or prone to quad. We get the arms underneath, so we push from the forearms. We get our center of mass back. It's going to make it a lot easier. Think about how we can reduce that range of motion of that transfer by either lifting the ground up by using books, pillows, cushions, whatever, or lowering that surface by taking a cushion off, for example. Think about where they're using that upper extremity, and we may need to find a broader surface if they have issues bearing weight through that upper extremity. These are all things that we're thinking about. Then you take your plan, and then you start to think about the context that you perform that floor transfer in, right? This is where we start to think about where would they commonly need to be able to do this transfer? Where do we commonly see a fall, for example? And where do these people need to be able to recover? Bathroom is a huge one, a very, very common one. Oh no, freak the puppy out. Puppies thinks we're playing, right? And so I really encourage y'all, as you start to do these floor transfers more and more, think about where you are doing them. All right. Maybe not initially in the bathroom, right? If that place is already a scary place or they've already had a fall, there's probably some trauma associated with that. I wouldn't go in right there. I'd probably do it in a safer, more comfortable environment for them. Work on that skill of getting to and from the ground. And then let's graduate into trying to do that same thing in the bathroom, for example. All right. So the context of where you perform your floor transfers is important as well. Don't just do them in your nice floor transfer corner of your clinic, right? We want to make people a little bit more adaptable. Bathrooms are good. Outside is as well. Think about the transitions of different surfaces. this can cause a lot of instability for folks. A lot of falls can happen there. So if a fall can happen in an area, we probably want to be able to get up from the ground in that area as well. So thinking about getting outside. I know Julie, I've seen her post all kinds of sessions with her folks where they're doing this type of stuff in an outdoor setting. And I guarantee you that outdoor setting was not just some random place, but a place that person frequented and probably was, maybe at some risk of a fall in that particular area. And so we can practice that and get folks much more comfortable. Yeah, confidence in the bathroom floor mobility is confidence in cleaning a bathroom. For sure. Julie with the hashtag discharge homebound status. I love it. So think about the steps that you're going to do. Think about the context. Think about the location. And if you are able to put that all together, you're going to give someone a priceless skill that is going to change their perceptions of themselves, what they're capable of doing, and it will give them confidence to do things that they typically wouldn't do, right? This is absolutely huge. This goes to that concept of falls efficacy. How confident are you in being able to do activities without falling? And if you become more confident in your ability to get up from the ground, you likely are going to get a little less fearful of falling. And that less fear will likely help your performance a little bit, and you'll be much more likely to do different things that are going to make you physically active. They're going to encourage those social connections to get out into the community. So there's a lot of effects from doing something as simple as a floor transfer, particularly with this population. So we really want to highlight that intervention. Awesome. You all crushed that assignment. I encourage you, what you did in that assignment, I want you to really think about going through different scenarios before you use this with your patients, right? If you ever get the chance to have a course with Jeff Musgrave, he's going to tell you all about a lovely story let's tell it now, Jeff. Do you mind sharing with one of your lovely experiences? This is like,
oh yeah,
the majority of the MMOA faculty, like most of the things that we try and share with y'all are just when we, made mistakes ourselves and like, all right, y'all shouldn't do this because I've already made that mistake. Share with them one of the floor transfer sessions that you had with one of your patients.
Yeah. So my first job out of school, I was in inpatient rehab, stroke unit, learned a ton, had gained a lot of confidence, enough confidence that I had one of my younger patients had a CVA, recovering very well. He was actually still working as a pharmacist, crushing it. I mean, we pulled out all the stops on getting this guy ready to go home. We got permission to do a day pass and take him to a local Mexican restaurant so he knew he could go out and enjoy time in the community, go out with his wife. We did all the things. And the guy told me, I asked him, I was like, dude, are you so pumped to get out of here? You've only been here a couple weeks. You're doing great. You're walking with a cane. You're ready. And he's like, no, I'm terrified. I was like, why are you scared? Like, you're doing so well. This is like my rock star patient. Never seen anyone do this well before. And he said, well, I don't think if I get down on the ground, I know how to get up. And it was like, boom, cowboy style, first year out, new grad, grab a couple mats, toss him in his room. We're going to fix this right now. How much planning did I do? None. Made no plan whatsoever. I got this guy down on the ground, had no use of his left arm, and watched him go from prone to quadruped, down to prone, uncontrolled, multiple times, shook his confidence. I looked like an idiot. I ended up having to help pull him up from quadruped to get him in half kneeling. Did not supply him any confidence with going home, and learned a very valuable lesson about making a plan before you do something with your patient. Maybe try it yourself, like this activity. Think about what could happen, have a good plan, have furniture there. Don't face plant your patient right before discharge. Don't be me. Do better. You can do better.
Did you at least get some Mexican food out of that?
Oh, heck yeah. I filled my belly full on the company dollar for sure.
Sweet.
But yeah, the floor transfer fail happened after.
I love it. And Jeff's not alone. Every MMOA faculty on this call, has a similar story. So get out there, cowboy it a little bit, but practice ahead of time, and I'll give you a good plan to execute this well. Awesome. All right. Good work, y'all. So we had one student question, and I love this question because for some of you all, this is going to fall a lot on you versus many of you all have a team of like OTs, for example, or speech language pathologists where this will likely be more in their realm. But Amy asked, where or how is one trained in the MOCA and slums? As both say training is required. So MOCA does require certification. It is 1 hour long. I didn't get the exact price. I'm not certified in using the MOCA, but if you work at a public institution, if you're a student, if you're associated with any like academic center or an academia, you don't have to pay anything. So they've got a bunch of partnerships where it's a free 1 hour certification training so you can administer the MOCA. The slums does not have a certification. There's no requirement there. They just have a very brief training video that they recommend you watch, and you can download that and let it rip. So not the barrier to entry isn't too big. So I would check that out. Jeff just dropped the links in the chat box, and then you can use that QR code as well. But I would encourage you all, if you aren't familiar with this, just give it a look through and just be familiar so you can speak the language as well with your colleagues that may be doing more of this type of screening, particularly, the OTs in the crowd, speech language pathologists, they do a lot of this. And we, from the PT side of things, we rely heavily on them. All right, good questions, y'all. Awesome. Okay. We did it. We're through weeks 1 through 7. Hold on a second. Melanie, any videos cues for floor transfer with hemiplegia, upper and lower extremity weakness, and low trunk control? Yes, Melanie. I don't have any videos right off the top of my head, but this is a scenario that if you ever come to our live course, MMOA Live on Sunday, we have half the morning on Sunday is on the topic of falls preparedness, where we talk about a lot of floor transfers, but we also talk about a lot of fall training, just a very all-encompassing view of kind of the whole fall dilemma, if you will. And we cover strategies to do that particular transfer. What I will say, Melanie, is the use of furniture is absolutely huge. That whole concept of beaching yourself, getting as much of your mass up on a mat, ottoman, deep couch, or whatever it may be, is going to be absolutely vital. Whether you're able to do that kind of going forward or in a supine or quadruped manner, or you're going backwards, both are going to be very helpful strategies. So furniture is a huge role in that particular transfer. But I'd say come to the live course if you haven't, because we definitely cover that on Sunday morning. Awesome. All right, so we have 1 week left, all about health promotion, kind of tying things together. We're going to talk about the buckets of health promotion and the 5A framework, because what we really need to be aware of is that we need to know what we can improve. We need to know how to improve. We also need to be able to rank what's the most important thing to influence this person, but then also how can we influence this person, and the whole concept of behavior change and the evidence behind it and the skill behind that as well. We will also cover anything related to this course that you want to talk about. All right, so be sure to use those student questions. All right, so if you have any cases, anything you want clarification on throughout these 8 weeks, drop it in the student question doc and we will address it next week. Now, we are coming towards the end of the course, and so this is where we need to be very, very clear that you need to have all of your assignments and your exams need to be passed. All of that needs to be completed by Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you submit this after Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you will not get your completion certificate, okay? I know many of you all are behind, several weeks behind. Get that in. All right. We will not accept any emails after the fact of saying, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. No, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sunday, if you want your completion certificate. All right. Any other questions? All clear. All right. Y'all have a lovely rest of your Wednesday evening. We're super grateful for y'all. Let's finish strong. We'll see y'all next week. Bravo, team.